Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the third event in George Washington University's Sesno Series, dedicated to exploring the critical issues of democracy, public understanding, and civil discourse at a pivotal time in our nation's history. This series embodies the essence of GW. Located in the heart of our nation's capital, GW is home to a diverse community of scholars and leaders from across the political spectrum and around the world. Today's conversation will explore the most pressing questions facing the country at this very moment. First, I would like to share our gratitude for the generosity of GW alumni Ted Siegel and Meredith Siegel, who established an endowed fund to ensure that the essential debate and dialogue surrounding our democracy will endure, and to honor Frank Sesno. We are honored that GW is where they have chosen to make this lasting impact, supporting our students and fostering critical conversations like the one that we will have this evening. Frank's career represents the very best of journalism and public affairs. At CNN, he served as the White House correspondent, anchor, talk show host, and Washington bureau chief. His reporting has spanned global conflicts, humanitarian crises, science and climate change, and the highest levels of politics and policymaking. He has interviewed presidents and prime ministers, advocates, and activists. In 2023, he was awarded GW's Presidential Medal in recognition of his many achievements and contributions. He was named the executive director of the Alliance for a Sustainable Future that same year. Frank is a firm believer in the power of people to drive change and in the power of research to improve lives. It is GW's mission to be a convener for thought leadership in the pursuit of these ideals and in making the world a better place, to enable tough and intellectual conversations about deep divisions and pressing challenges. For generations, this mission has enabled GW students to be on the front row of history, engaging with defining issues of their time. At GW, we lead, we challenge, and we illuminate the pathway forward. The School of Media and Public Affairs, housed within the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, is the ideal home for this conversation. SMPA prepares students to engage in accountable and tenacious pursuits of truth, values that lie at the heart of a liberal arts education and serve as the essential tools for a thriving democracy. So thank you all for being here with us tonight, and it is now my great pleasure to welcome Professor Frank Sesno to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. Welcome to what I know will be another very dynamic, provocative, and thought-provoking evening. I want to do a quick shout-out to Dean Paul Walbeck, Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, who properly talks about the engaged liberal arts. Well, we will engage the liberal arts tonight, and then some. And to Peter Loge, the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs, which I call home. This is a series, as the provost mentioned, about democracy and discourse, and thanks to the Siegels for making it possible. I have been a journalist and a frontline observer in Washington for a long time, longer than I'd like to admit, and I have never seen anything like the moment we are going through. A nonstop news cycle that can't possibly keep up with the nonstop news. A president and administration that have made no secret of what they intended to do, right? They talked about it, disruption, elimination of the administrative state, and they talked about retribution. Big change is needed, and there are polls, and I may talk about one later, that show that the people on both sides, conservatives and liberals, believe that the country is not going in the right direction and needs big change. But the question is, to what? And what about the shockwaves that it's causing? So we'll talk a lot about that. We'll also talk about what this means for American democracy and our sense of ourselves as a nation. We are polarized, we are divided, for sure. It makes what we're doing here at the university and in this conversation even more important. To come together, to listen respectfully, to learn and to lean in, and to think about where we are and where we're going. In her book, High Conflict, Amanda Ripley says that high conflict is a mode of thinking, and these are her words, of thinking and feeling that leads to anger, hate, and an us versus them mentality. She says we address that not by getting out of conflict, but by embracing the conflict, because she says that's what makes us better. It pushes each other to challenge each other and to grow by having the hard conversations, driven by curiosity. So that's what we do here and what we will do here. I want to, before I introduce the governor, offer some thanks. First, of course, to the Seagulls for making this possible, and to many people on the ground who made this evening possible. Sarah Morissette, Alex Ashley, Melody Barrow, and our production and communication team, Jack, Anna, Jane, Ebony, and David. So super thanks to you all, and thanks to all for coming. So we've been talking for a long time about, well, there's a lot of change going on in Washington, and we really should have a Republican join us and talk about it. Turns out a lot don't want to come out and talk about it. Why would that be? But our guest tonight did and does, and he's here willingly and exuberantly. The 82nd governor of New Hampshire, elected to 4 terms. He has a bachelor's in civil and environmental engineering from MIT, and when he came out of school, actually he did a stint at NYU at their Tisch School of the Arts. I might want to ask him about that, what happened there. And he started his career as an environmental engineer, working in wastewater treatment, plants, landfills, that kind of thing, cleaning up contaminated soil and water. Comes from a political family. I covered his dad when he was White House Chief of Staff. Before that, he was governor. His brother was senator. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Governor Chris Sununu.
That was great.
Is that great?
That was terrific.
Are we off to a good start? Thank you very much.
The intro is always the easiest.
I hope so. Thank you for being with us.
You bet. This is great. I can't see anything, but well, I assume there's people out there.
Can we turn on the house lights for just a second?
No, that's okay.
No, I just want you to see who's in the audience.
Frank, people show up for you.
Okay. How many students are in the audience?
Oh, excellent.
Good turnout of students.
Great.
And we'll hear from them a little bit later. But we're going to talk about lots of things. By the way, how'd that thing go with Anderson Cooper? You made a little... You don't have to quote him.
No. So the Anderson...
He had a new name for you, as I recall.
Yeah, no, Anderson and I get along great. That was the irony of the whole thing. I don't think he actually meant to be rude to me. He got casual. I mean, he's Anderson Cooper. The guy is like...
Did he get casual or did he get mad?
No, he wasn't mad at all. He honestly, I think, just kind of forgot the camera was on. It's like you and your buddies talking, and he's like, oh, come on, man, don't be... I'm like, okay. I think we're live, Anderson. So it was all fine. It was great. We get along great.
I do want to welcome our C-SPAN audience, and I would share what was said in that thing if it weren't for a family program, although that's what CNN was.
They're a nonprofit, so we have to keep it clean.
Okay, good. I want to start with a video. Sarah and Alex Ashley went out and talked to some students. These are School of Media and Public Affairs students, so journalism and political communication, which is what we do here. And asked them to get a sense of how they feel about our moment in politics, and we'll talk about that and many other things. So let's take a look.
Sure.
I'm trying not to feed into the doomerism, but I would say I don't think it looks too good. There's a lot of division, a lot of anxiety. People are really upset and very frustrated with what's going on with the current administration.
The Republican Party has American values at heart, and to let it descend into what it is now, the Trumpism, is so unlike what the GOP is, and I just want to know why everybody can happen. So I think I'm just feeling a little more nervous being in this stage of my life and location.
There's an underlying understanding and mutual agreement that people are working, living in the same country. So I think it's kind of a path that people have to pick on to explore the right methods to get there. But I think the destination is the same.
I think for now, time will tell. We just have to wait and see what's going to happen or how things are actually going to go now that these new policies and new executive orders have been enacted.
So what you heard there is just a sampling, not scientific, but what Nicole says is very interesting. A lot of division, a lot of anxiety, and concern about how divided we are.
Sure.
Why are we so divided?
Yeah.
You've been a governor, you've talked to people.
So a couple things. I think one of the things to have perspective on is, unfortunately, a lot of these students, they didn't, I'm not that old. I'm only 50. I act like I'm 25. But point being, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't like this, right? the Democrats and Republicans could get along. There's the famous Reagan and Tip O'Neill examples of, hashing it out. My father was at the White House, and him and Kennedy would go at it, left and right. But at the end of the day, they'd find a way to move forward together. So since about let's call it 2008, 2010, for a variety of reasons, both sides are completely at fault. And social media, new technologies, how we communicate. This generation, that's all they see, unfortunately. Now, I'm the eternal optimist. I really am. I always believe in a system, and I believe in the best in it until it's proven not to be a complete failure. The argument, I don't blame one side or the other. Both sides say, the Republicans are going to destroy democracy, and the Democrats are killing the Constitution, all that kind of stuff, right? Those are just dog whistles for, I don't agree with you, and the other side is evil. I'm not putting the blame on Trump or anything like that, but obviously the Democrats, let me back up. We talk a lot about the Republican Party, and just to kind of address what that one young woman said is, how can you let this happen? Look, first off, no one person is letting anything happen. I worked really hard to get Nikki Haley elected. Didn't quite work out so well. But at the end of the day, the party isn't defined by one individual, right? The Democrat Party isn't defined by one individual, and the Republican Party. Now, he's the leader, and he's the voice of the party.
Very much defined by one individual right now.
Well, sure, as was the Democrat Party defined. Well, you don't think that when someone is the president, you don't think Biden and Harris define the Democrat Party?
No, because you heard all kinds of carping and griping and complaining and criticizing from the Democrats against Obama, against Biden. I mean, they
Well, okay, we can disagree on that a little bit. I would say this. The argument I have is, if you think Trump is a problem, that can be your opinion, fine. Trump is Trump. There's no Trump light. There's no Trump 2.0 coming in. I've always argued, and I'm not trying to be overly polarizing to start, but I've always argued the Democrat Party has a much bigger DNA problem, right? Because I think generationally there's a gap between what this upcoming generation sees as the progressive values and the socialism and all that sort of thing that they want to see out of the Democrat Party versus what we'll call the old school Democrat Party, which is just a little more of the traditional. And Republicans have the same thing, but we're not defined by, Trump is Trump, he's the president. We're not defined by it. There's no Trump light coming. I'm not saying it goes back to the way it was, but look, who's going to be running for president in 4 years? It might be J.D. Vance, it might be DeSantis again, it'll probably be some governors.
Might it be you?
No, I need to make some money.
I see.
If you're hiring, let me know. No, but in all seriousness, I think both parties have problems in different ways. I think social media and how we consume information is at the heart of a lot of this. I think people talk about empathy, but they don't practice it. And I think the reason I get reinstilled with optimism is because I don't live in this, godforsaken city. So this place is a bubble unto itself, as you know, right? I was a governor of a state where you're constantly held accountable, where you believe in local control. One of the reasons I actually like what's happening, what Trump is doing in some ways, it's a decentralizing of government. That's a very positive thing. That's empowering to more citizens. And if you do that, if we can champion that as opposed to just looking at Washington, D.C., people clearly have more faith in the system. The more you localize the process, the more faith you're going to build in the system.
We'll come back and talk about Trump in a minute. Anybody in the room from New Hampshire? Okay.
Live free or die.
Anybody in the room been to New Hampshire?
There you go.
All right. So you've got people.
Don't worry, you'll all be retiring.
Right, but here's what I want to ask you about the division. There's a Johns Hopkins poll was done just before the election. And they found there was a very disturbing response in that something like nearly half of Americans think the opposing side was evil.
Yes.
Not just an adversary, but evil. And that's a big change that we've seen.
Hugely problematic.
Okay. Why have we so demonized the other? And what is it that people like you, people who have a podium, people who are leaders, can do, if anything, because maybe you can't now, to change that?
So a couple things. So if you want to know why we polarized, you can go to, at the heart of it, I believe it's social media. I believe, not that social media
is at the heart of it?
Yes, because it's how we communicate and absorb information and where we gather.
But it's also what we're communicating.
Well, that's right. And the fact that we can say anything and it goes out to the whole world, it's not verified, it's not checked. It's usually when people are posting things on social media, 98% of it's what's happening nationally on a political scale, as opposed to what's happening locally. And again, when you're doing it, you don't have to look somebody in the eye and have an actual discussion, right? You can be as with all the vitriol you want, and there's no accountability to it, if you will. Now, I've always argued that my generation was smart enough to invent social media, but we didn't have the maturity to understand how to handle it, right? This generation does. I believe in this generation. I don't agree with the politics all the time, but this generation has grown up with it. They know the pushes and pulls. They're going to learn the problems with it and how to handle it a lot better than we ever will.
So you think this generation or anybody this cat is out of the bag, right?
It's not coming back in, yeah.
Is there a way to come back from viewing people who are disagreeing with us as evil? Or is this now baked into who and what we are?
It's baked into the conversation, but I think this generation will have a better understanding to have a healthy sense of cynicism when they hear that kind of stuff.
All right, I want to ask you about bipartisanship.
Sure.
Endangered species. But you know, I started my career, my journalism career, in the neighboring state of Vermont. And Vermont, New Hampshire are wonderful examples of sort of Jeffersonian democracy.
Yeah.
You still go out, you can stop the governor on the street, you can have a conversation with your neighbor.
Yep.
When there was journalism, it was about you reporting on, about, from, to the neighbors.
That's it.
Right? How did you make that happen? Did you make that happen?
Yeah, so a couple things. The reason I'm so let me take a half a step. New Hampshire, live free or die, right? I always say it's
That's
more
the
than,
motto, in case you know that.
I would hope. It's more than 4 cool words on a license plate, right? It sounds cool, but it really is at the heart of it, throwing politics aside, about limited taxes, local government, local control, limited government, if anything.
For those who don't know, in New Hampshire, and this goes back to when I was there decades ago, there's no state sales tax and there's no state income taxes. It's one of the few states with no broad-based tax.
And the reason we get away, we quote, get away with that is the only taxes you really pay as a citizen is property tax. We have pretty high property tax. Kind of stinks. But the value there is this. As a governor, as the state legislature, we have no control over your property taxes. Zero. You do. You go to town meeting every year and you decide what the curriculum will be in your classrooms, what the teachers' contracts will be. I can't do that. Only you can do that as a parent, as a citizen, as someone who drives on the roads. What potholes will be filled, right? We have state government as well, of course, but we keep it so localized. What happens? People get empowered. You go to the town meeting. My brother's a selectman in my town. Do you want to see the fights I've had with my brother? And I really mean it sincerely. And you get to understand where the dollars are going, what's happening with your taxes. You get much more engaged in New Hampshire than I would argue anywhere else in America in terms of the civics of it, because it's transparent. And when you have an argument at town meeting, you're usually arguing with your neighbor or your brother. And guess what? The next day, your kids are at the bus stop together. So you can have those arguments and you learn how to walk away, and you don't make it personal. You just make it about a difference of opinion, but at the end of the day, you get along. And that, if I may, at the core, is why we hold the first in the nation primary. People say, well, what gives you the right? Frankly, we do it better than everybody else because we have the highest voter turnout, we have the most educated voters in the country, and we have such high demands of accountability for the candidates. We don't care what your name is. We don't care how much money you have. We don't care about any of that. You got to earn it on the street.
And you have Dixville Notch, which has how many voters?
6 now. Yeah. We have 6, and that's the first one. But my point is this: the local control aspects of what we do empower transparency and participation like nowhere else, which keep it independent.
So come back to the bipartisanship.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting example of this bipartisan. You called it the miracle budget.
Yeah. Oh, that last one I did. Yeah, that was amazing.
So you had bipartisan support for some very for some dramatic things, including a big
school choice, tax cuts, raise for the state employees. So just to take a step back, we have 1.4 million people in New Hampshire. We have 400 state reps. Right? It's the 3rd largest parliamentary body behind British Parliament, U.S. Congress, and then the state of New Hampshire. And guess what?
It's a little state. I mean, population of
1.4 million. So by definition, it's the most representative body of government on the planet. And you know how much those guys get paid? $100 a year. It's truly a volunteer government. So what does that mean? You never know who's going to win. Though he or she who knocks on the most doors and connects with people and talks about what they want to do in their community gets elected. It's not about the money. So what you're referencing is I've had Republicans run my House and Senate. I've had Democrats, when I was governor, run my House and Senate. In my last term, I got the split of all splits. 201 Republicans, 199 Democrats. At the exact same time, Kevin McCarthy, who's a friend, Kevin was going through, he had like a 10-vote swing. And are they going to get a Speaker of the House? So, he gets elected on the 15th vote. Guess what? My Speaker got elected on the 1st, right? And at the end of the day, that budget, people said, you'll never get anything done. Complete gridlock. You never, because by the way, depending on attendance, if a few Republicans don't show up, Democrats control the day for the House votes. So people said, it's going to be complete gridlock. You'll never get anything done. Let me cut to the end of the story, which you're referencing. I got my balanced budget passed. And by the way, all states have balanced budget amendments. We have to pass a balanced budget, unlike Washington. We have to be fiscally disciplined. My budget got passed unanimously on the first vote in the House of Representatives.
How did you do that? Or how did that get done?
I talked to them. So I'll do a little bit of the politics of it, right? I knew what the Democrats wanted. I couldn't give it to them. I disagreed with a lot of it. But, I find that when you can just give a little, and you do two things. You give, the Democrats wanted a little over here, a little over there, things that were minor issues for Republicans. I wanted a big thing like my big tax cut. I abolished the interest and dividends tax. I wanted expansion of school choice and all of this. You give a little, you can get a lot. And not only did I give them a few small things here and there, I gave them credit. I went out to the unions and I gave the unions not a raise, but it was a change in the rule that allowed some more flexibility for them. And then I went out with the Democrats and I said, thank you guys for getting this done. I wouldn't have even seen this issue. But thanks to the Democrats here and a few of the Republicans there, we all came together, we found a way and got it done. And they were so happy. I not only got it done for them, but I gave them, and rightly so, credit. And so while we disagreed on a lot of these big issues, at the end of the day, we were able to work enough into the budget and out of the budget that we all were able to come together. Some didn't like it, some didn't, but at the end of the day, 400. We got on a unanimous vote. And I'm very proud of that because I just wanted to show, if anything, Washington, don't tell me that it's gridlock. Don't tell me you can't get something done. When someone says we can't get it done, it's just telling me you don't have the political will and courage to do what you need to do, to either push back on your own party, work with people on the other side. It doesn't mean you compromise your principles as a Republican or a conservative. It means you understand that there's bigger issues in the state sometimes, and you have to think, at least as a governor, you got to think globally. I got my legislature to think globally as a state as opposed to just to their singular district.
So let's now travel from your state, New Hampshire, to Washington, which you talked about, okay?
Few and simple.
Where you say you got to give a little. Well,
yeah.
we now have a chief executive who's executive ordering a lot.
Yeah, sure.
And giving nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like the Fast and Furious, right? Here's a little list. Banning birthright citizenship, blowing up USAID, firing inspectors general and commissioners, booting the president and the board of the Kennedy Center, granting pardons to the most violent criminals from...
Well, let's not get into pardons. Both parties are completely
All right, I'm not done
problematic
with my list.
there, yeah.
Okay. Doge, heard of Doge? Elon Musk, with access to files, sensitive data, all of that kind of stuff. Pulling research contracts that have already been signed. This affects universities and others. Firing federal workers en masse.
Yeah.
But he's not giving he's not giving anything.
Well, why does but you haven't explained why the other side doesn't like that. Wasn't it Al Gore who said we have to get rid of 12% of the employees?
You just explained how you got a bipartisan support for the budget by engaging the other side.
Right.
If a Republican criticizes Trump, they're in trouble. Never mind a Democrat. He hasn't talked to Democrats.
So a couple things here. Again, the process to talk to Democrats will be when it all comes to Congress. Most of this stuff...
Congress, what's that?
Well... So,
I mean,
yeah.
seriously,
Yeah,
there's a serious conversation that we're going to have about whether there's a Congress at this point and what role it has in checks and balances. But
well, most of this will have to go through Congress. So what he's doing is he's telling Doge doesn't have technically much power at the end of the day other than to say, we're going to, all the executive orders say we're going to review and realign, right? We're going to review and realign. And certain agencies are going to disappear. They're going to bring all these recommendations to Congress. And what they're going to do is force, and we can take any of these agencies, plus there'll be a whole lot more. We haven't even gotten to Health and Human Services or Defense. They're all going to be completely put under the microscope. And say, you need to come back and justify why you need to exist. Justify what the value is to the American public, what the value is for the American dollar, how it keeps us safe and secure and all that. And Congress will have to do most of the actual heavy lifting. And what is it, like a couple vote margin in Congress? Similar to New Hampshire, they're going to have to give a little to get a lot.
You think that can happen in this town?
I don't know whether it can or will, but that will be the process. There's no question about that. And even Trump has said that. We know we're going to have to work with Congress to get most of this done.
Are you at all concerned, would you offer any advice to this president about the damage that's done in the short term with the mad dash through the executive orders? There are people, there's There's food that is not delivered
Yeah.
to hungry people waiting and rotting
So
places.
yeah, so the way he's going about it, I love and hate it at the same time, right? And it's okay to do that. I love that he's fundamentally doing it because, and this is why. Let's deal with Congress. This is really Congress's job, right? Accountability, managing budgets, asking departments to be accountable to themselves and what their value. They've done nothing. And I'm not talking nothing for the past couple of years. And Republicans and Democrats equally have been complete buffoons for 20 plus years. I'd go back to 1998, 1999, since the last balanced budget. These guys have a complete derelict of duty and not done their job. So what Trump is saying, okay, you had 25 years. That's it. So now I'm going to bring a group in here. We're going to go hard and fast. We're going to bring a lot of recommendations. We're going to do everything under the sun that people have talked about but not have the courage to do. And we're going to bring it to Congress. Now, you guys can decide what you want to do, but we're doing this because you haven't. And I would argue the reason this is happening is because Congress did nothing for 25 years. There wouldn't be a need to do this. And not only are they finding efficiency, the amount of fraud and corruption here, guys, is staggering.
Well, how do you know that?
What do you mean?
How do you know that?
You think there's not fraud and corruption in government?
I think I'm sure there's fraud. I'm sure there's corruption. I know there's inefficiency, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But the process that's happening here, and as a journalist,
Yeah.
I've covered this through the years. When your father was White House Chief of Staff, by the way, you mentioned the balanced budget that they had that in the 90s. Yeah. The reason they had the balanced budget in the 90s is because George Herbert Walker Bush, for whom your dad worked, who ran Read My Lips, No New Taxes, actually raised taxes,
Right.
which may be why he lost re-election.
Probably.
Yeah. And so that there
Most
could be a
definitely.
balanced budget down the line.
That's right.
That was a process. That was a
right.
negotiation.
Yeah.
That was somebody giving and getting to get something
And that's
done.
where you're right, this process, and I'm not here to
that's
apologize.
what's broken.
Yeah. I'm not here to apologize for Elon and Trump and all that. But I'll say this. The speed at which, let me back up. The alternative, what if they came out, let's do a thought experiment. What if they had come out and said, look, the president said, I'm given 6 months, and we're going to tear this thing apart, and in 6 months we'll come out and give you a report. And they didn't say anything for 6 months. There would be very little criticism. People are like, oh, they're working on something. They're going to come out in 6 months with a report. To their credit, they're going hard and fast, and they're talking about what they're doing literally every step of the way, which opens them up for massive criticism, some of it rightly so. And even Elon the other day said, look, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to bat 1,000 here. We're going to break some eggs. But believe me, there's a lot of eggs to be broken.
What's the rightly so criticism?
The right criticism to them?
Some of the criticism, rightly so. What's the criticism?
They're I think being too abrupt with some of these. When they get rid of USAID, and by the way, they didn't get rid of USAID. They said we're going to review USAID. Maybe some of these programs will go. What they should say is something like this: X billions of dollars go to USAID. We think that we can reallocate 5 to 7 million back to the wildfires in California, back to North Carolina, back to the disasters. We're going to reappropriate the mishandled dollars back to America. And again, we're going to figure out where those agencies or sub-departments need to be restructured, as opposed to saying, we're getting rid of this, getting rid of this, getting rid of this. It's not too fast, but it's too hard. I don't mind getting rid of the employees, though. There's nothing wrong with getting rid of the employees.
Let's talk about that. And could we have the house lights for just a minute? Because I'd like to ask the audience a question. The students in the room, could you raise hands again, please? How many of you you're here at GW, obviously, in Washington, D.C., this terrible town you've come to for school. How many of you are considering some form of, or were considering some form of public service for a career?
That's great.
Okay. You did that too as governor. Are they wrong?
No, why are you implying it? Why would I think they're wrong?
All right, I told you
Public service doesn't mean you have to be in this city. I mean, the most valuable public service you can do is local. What has more impact on your life, President Trump or your school board? Your school board every day of the week, because they actually impact what's going to happen with their kids and the education in the future. What has more impact on your life, President Trump or what's happening locally in your city and town, where you can make, or a local nonprofit that's helping the poor, helping the needy, or helping those that need extra help?
So you're posing a question here, and that's very good,
Yeah.
because we actually talked to a student who addressed some of this. Dariana Bautista, I think Dariana's in the room, right here. And we talked to Dariana earlier, Alex and Sarah did, about the people part and what's going on, both the research and working for the federal government. So take a look at what she said. Dariani, thank you.
Yeah.
So talk to Dariani
Yeah.
for a minute.
So
Wait a minute. Let me help you set. Let me set this up.
I thought it was set up pretty well.
It was set up brilliant.
Very good job.
Roommate who's doing research, and there's a big feeling that we don't need the research.
Right.
Dissing the scientists, and people who work for the federal government who are being told you're cheats, you're fraudsters, and you're not needed.
Yeah. So a couple things. Let's deal with we can talk about the environmental piece first. Like, I'm an environmental engineer. I did that for years. The Paris climate agreement, I think it's nonsense. I really do. There's no enforceability. There's no standards being held by any country. It's just an unenforceable document that is costing the country massive amounts of money. I would argue that America, the United States, does a phenomenal job. And we keep making huge investments in terms of being responsible, whether it's emissions or carbon emissions or whatever it is, and we're going to absolutely get there. Other countries that signed on to that agreement, the Chinas of the world, are putting up 50 coal factories a year with no accountability.
They're also racing ahead with electric vehicles and battery technology and renewable energy.
Yeah, but we're talking about they are an environmental disaster. A disaster. I mean, compared to this country, not even close. So I think people are going, whoa, 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 this is completely unfair, right? We're trying our best to do our part to this agreement. No one else is. There's no enforceability, so we'll move on. On the employee side, I'd say this. It's not that the work is completely devalued in terms of what a lot of these employees are doing, or the research is doing, or whatever it is. I could pick out a lot of things that they're cutting that I would say, okay, it's interesting, but is it worth the dollar? This gets back to the heart of what I'm all about, which is fiscal responsibility. We owe 35 trillion, 36. 36 trillion. Does the government owe 36 trillion? No. You owe 36 trillion. Your neighbors do. Your kids do. You owe that money. So for every dollar that goes to pay down that 36 trillion, that's hours you worked away from your family, the sacrifice and blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into the system. Do you know what 36 trillion is? And it's a real number, guys. It's not an imaginary number. You could pay $100 a second for like 30,000 years. No, 11,000 years, if I'm doing the math right. And that gets to how much we owe. So it's not about you're not valued. It's about, guys, there's only so many dollars in the till. We have to, because Congress has screwed this thing up for 25 years, they haven't balanced it. They let us go into such debt, and it puts our entire economy in such a weak position. We got to make some tough choices and prioritize. So that project or that organization or that agency, the Financial Consumer Protection Bureau, let's use that one as an example. I'll pick any one. That was created after 2008. Completely duplicative and accountable to nobody. So the FDIC or the SEC or the Credit Union Association, they already have a lot of these rules and stuff in place, and they can do a lot of the work that this bureau currently does. So do we really need this duplicative thing? They're the judge, jury, and executioner, by the way. They're not accountable to Congress. They're not accountable to anything. They just make rules up as they go. So I think people said, look, we can keep a lot of the good out of that, save a lot of the money, and move on. Doesn't mean the work that those individuals are doing isn't valued, but if it's duplicative or we can have a better use of that dollar, look, you got to make tough decisions. So nobody in Washington wants to make a tough decision, and it stinks. It's not easy. It's painful. But like, you owe this money.
It's also people. You have, I looked this up.
But the government isn't in charge of keeping you employed.
Congressional Research Service lists 10,887 federal government employees, workers in New Hampshire District 1.
Yeah.
And 8,049 in District 2.
Yeah.
You okay if half of them are fired?
Yes. Absolutely, guys. The government isn't here to keep you employed. The government, let me back up. The government isn't here to solve your problem.
The government isn't here to keep you employed.
No.
When you're employed, you expect some process, some transparency. You just get your head lopped off like that. Even I've laid people off, okay? Yeah. I've laid people. We had a process.
As have I.
All right?
Yeah.
So we had a process. Is there a process here?
If there's no money to... in New Hampshire, I can't just keep borrowing money, right? Because I have to have a balanced budget. So when the revenues don't come in or things don't match, I have to let people go. You've gotten, not you people, but the city and our federal government has gotten away with, well, we don't have to let anybody go. We don't have to make tough decisions. You do. You really, really do. And unfortunately, it's all coming to a head at the same time.
What about people like Dariani there and others, people I've talked to,
I'm
sure you've talked to, who don't feel valued, don't feel respected because of the language that is virtually, that says, all of you.
Yeah, so that's where, again, the process is too hard. I mean, there's an argument to be made that the process, I don't mind the speed, but that's where my hope, and this is what I think is going to happen. I might be proven completely wrong, and I'll be the first to admit it. My hope is this. We're only 30 days in, right? As of 4 days ago, DOJ is starting to put out the receipts and the proof of what they're doing and all that. And we can go back and forth. We can see it. Maybe we'll agree on it. Maybe we won't. In about 4, 5, 6 months, my guess is they're going to have a report to Congress, first of many probably, and say, here's our first phase report, and here's the backup, and here's the information. I mean, the reason I got in the argument with Anderson Cooper is because he's like, where's the proof? And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Give these guys credit for telling you what they're doing, right? But they will provide the proof, and if they don't, they should be held accountable to that. And I get it. These are individuals and jobs and families. I totally get it. But at the end of the day, a couple things. We have a strong economy, right? You don't do it because people can find another job. It doesn't mean they're not valued, but Congress is going to have to make some tough decisions about who stays and who goes, something they've just not been willing to do. And unfortunately, it's like the perfect storm of problems where a lot of people all at once could potentially lose their job, their agency, or decentralize. That's the real answer here. You should be decentralizing Washington. People complain about the Department of Education. I think it's great that we might get, and I'm a governor, and I believe very strongly in education. But someone has yet to explain to me what's the value add for the federal Department of Education.
To look across the country to see that there's equality and of access, service. The people with disabilities are being.
You think governors don't do that?
I think governors do it very unevenly. What's available in states is all over the place.
And it should be. New Hampshire is not California, and we're not Mississippi and not New York. Look, I think, I'll use a real extreme example. I think Gavin Newsom and I don't see eye to eye on a lot. But I would argue Gavin Newsom knows what California needs for education and the needs and where the value is more than anybody in Washington, D.C.
Isn't there a sense?
As does Hochul in New York, as does Chris Sununu in New Hampshire.
Isn't there a sense that the Federal Department of Education is running things when in point of fact it isn't? What is it, like 7% of funds from the feds that actually go to local school districts?
So why do they have 5,000 employees?
Right. Well, school districts should be run by school districts. And
that's right. Right. So what does Washington add to that equation?
Washington adds to that equation some degree of equity. I know that's a word we're not supposed to use now. And some degree of oversight, right?
Oversight?
Yeah.
It's too much. It's so much oversight.
Is Title IX?
When Washington has offered me additional grants for special education, which we need desperately because so many more kids qualify for special ed at such a higher cost. Now every state needs more money for special ed. The hurdles and barriers that it took for me to get that money, that were the red tape, if you will, that were designed by Washington, made it so all the districts came back and said, Governor, it won't work. Like, don't even bring us this money because we'll have to send it back because we don't meet this weird standard that was set up by some congressman in Arizona at the time or whatever it was. So my argument is this. Every state knows what they need. If you want to send us the money, great. But let states that know, that are on the ground, that know what the needs are. I would never tell Maura Healey in Massachusetts what Massachusetts needs. I can show by example what might be working in New Hampshire and all that, but she knows.
So let me just read a very short bit from a story today about schools and local control, because if you say that, so the Education Department, the Trump Education Department, warned schools in a letter on Friday that they risked losing federal funding if they continued to take race into account when making scholarship or hiring decisions, or so much as nodded to race in, quote, all other aspects of student, academic, and campus life. So let's say you're a school and you have a large group of young students from Ethiopia, right? You have a community there, and you need to hire an Ethiopian person to teach those kids, speak that language, have somebody there who looks like them, whatever it is. Now you can't do that, and now the government, now this education department is saying, we'll pull your funds.
That's absolutely not what they're saying. That
sounds like what they're saying.
No, they're saying the Supreme Court made a ruling. The Supreme Court ruled on this, that you cannot separate opportunity within education on race.
But what they're saying is you may not take race into consideration at all when hiring. And in a case like this, Lewiston, Maine, for example, has a large group of
in that case, they wouldn't take race; they'd take language. That's different than race.
Well, all right. Well, maybe they do take race. Maybe you have what if they do? What if you have a very diverse group of students, and you have a lot of black students, for example, and you say, we need to have some people here who look like them and who can talk to them and relate. That's now not allowed?
They're saying it has to be on merit. And the Supreme Court is saying that. That's the law.
But if you're the
Like, just
educator,
because
you're
you want it
talking-
to be
but you're-
different, I don't know what to tell you.
But aren't you talking about local control? And shouldn't a principal and a community be able to make that decision for themselves? Aren't they, in a sense,
I would argue a
doing-
private institution can, but a public institution is held to a completely different standard of meritocracy.
But you just talked about how there should be local control. Why isn't
Yeah.
this a good example of local control where people say, we want to have this
Because the argument
diversity?
is that it's reverse racism.
Not if you're...
I'm not making that argument. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just telling you there's a very clear argument of why that was overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court. They didn't do it just because. You know, I don't want to get into a race issue here, but I'm just telling you the Supreme Court said public institutions can't do that, so the Department of Education is saying, don't do that.
But so now you say, and by the way, it's not just public institutions. According to what I'm seeing and what we're hearing, is the Trump administration saying any institution that's taking any federal money, and that can include private universities.
It could be private universities, yeah. You have to forgive me. I don't know the law exactly that they're using to reference that. But I'm just telling you that's likely the basis of it.
Do you think that we've overdone it with this whole conversation about DEI? I mean, you signed a bill where you embraced diversity and inclusion. You walked away from that later. But have we just thrown the baby out with the bathwater here? We are a very diverse society. Why shouldn't we embrace that and explain that to people who are in more diverse environments than they've ever been before?
When I created my DEI commission, it was great. It worked wonderfully. It was all
2017, as I recall.
That's right, and it was all because we found out we had departments, police departments in particular, that came to us and said, look, when there's a crime and it has something to do with race, like they didn't have any of the training. They had no experience with it. They said, we just need help. So we created this commission that would hire folks to go out and just talk about what it was, the issues that were out there, how to be sensitive to certain things and all that sort of thing. And it worked really, really well. And we got that out there, and it kind of performed its duty. There's no question that DEI, as it's defined in 2024, is completely different than
How so?
It's become a political whistle. There's no question about that, right? That if you don't have this, then you are canceled, then you are excluded, then you cannot be part of our system. You have to have it. It's the exact opposite of what you're talking about there. You have to have it or you don't get funding. Colleges and universities get scored on it now or they don't get certain funding. That's not right.
But don't you think, I mean, if we're going to talk about cancel culture, we've
you
got a
should use it the
cancel
right way.
culture now like we've never had, where people are being fired, where funding is being restricted, where agencies are being shut down, where whole boards are being thrown out. I mean, we talked about cancel culture before. We're canceling people and firing them now.
Two separate things.
How so?
Cancel culture, as we talk about it in terms of like the wokeism and the cancel culture there, is all based on, I'm offended by what you say, I'm going to cancel. I don't agree with what you say, I'm going to cancel it. What you're talking about today is we don't have the money, we don't have the dollars, these are duplicative efforts and we can do it another way. Those are two very separate things as opposed to, I'm offended by your language, and so I'm going to cancel you. Those are very different things.
Except now we have, you criticize me, I'm offended by your language, you're fired.
No, people aren't being fired because they're being criticized.
They certainly are. Go to the FBI, go to DOJ. They're being investigated and fired because they did their jobs before to investigate. I mean, this is what's so interesting about it.
But that's a politicalization, right? That's introducing, theoretically, I don't know these individual cases, but theoretically they're saying, look, you introduce politics in an operation that needs to be completely apolitical, therefore you haven't done your job appropriately, we're getting rid of you. I'm not saying I agree with it per se. For the most part, I don't mind them at least looking at it. On both sides, by the way, right? There were a lot of Democrats, a lot of folks that, I mean, the famous couple, the husband and, or the man and the woman that were having the affair and that were caught with their texts back and forth that even the Biden DOJ had to get rid of because they were going after Trump and all that sort of thing. So it works on both sides, and you should root that out completely.
So if you were going over to have coffee or whatever beverage with President Trump right now to talk about DEI.
He drinks Diet Coke, I think.
Right.
To talk about DEI?
Yes.
What am I going to say about that?
That's what I'm going to ask you.
Oh. That's not what I'd be talking about.
But the example you gave, and the reason you signed the bill, is a great example. Where there's a police force dealing with a race, racial issue, where they don't understand it, we need to train, just as we need to train workforces. Mm-hmm. People are coming up, they have different experiences, they're working with a much more diverse set of people. Yet we're banning even the terms, the words DEI across government.
Well,
what is the proper calibration?
The proper calibration is if a local, state, or government wants to do something on DEI, If they want to set up a commission, if they want to have a new mission around here, have at it. Great, that's fine. The federal government has every right to say, we're not going to measure you on that, and we're not going to fund you on that, and we're not going to cancel you on that.
Well, we're not going to cancel you on it, but that's exactly what they're saying that they're doing, right?
It's the
If you
Supreme
receive
Court.
federal funding.
This isn't just their opinion. It's the Supreme Court saying, especially in education, you cannot do that. That's a very clear case that was defined
That's
like 3 years
that's
ago.
a different thing. That's at a level of hiring. But I've talked to private corporations who have said we're dropping the terms DEI. We're not even going to use the words.
That's their choice.
But it's not their choice because they feel federal contracts are in jeopardy.
You think companies are dropping DEI programs because they'll lose federal contracts if they keep them?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that's their choice. Has anyone said if you keep DEI, you're canceled and you can't work for the government? That has never been said. That has never been said.
But there is no DEI in the government anymore, so it's not an issue.
But if Disney wants to have a DEI program, they can have a DEI program. No one has said if you have a DEI program, you're not going to have a contract with the government. Has somebody said that I'm unaware of? No. No.
It certainly is out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I have talked to senior executives in government, and come to the universities, by the way. This is one of the things that universities, there are DEI programs at universities so that universities can accommodate the diverse populations, students, faculty, staff, and others that they've got in a way that builds a sense of community.
So again, I'm not apologizing for this administration. I'm just saying, if folks want to do something at a local level, I'm a big believer they should be able to do it. If the federal government doesn't want to fund into that, they have every right to say we're not funding into that. Should people be excluded because they have it? No, of course not. I don't believe that, and I would challenge to see who's actually said that and say if you have a DEI program, you can't be a contractor for the government.
Let me ask you another topic for you to offer your advice to the president on. This is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because I'm really interested in this, and this is on climate change. All right. So the federal government, as we heard, walking away from some of the research, walking away from the Paris Climate Accords, whatever you think of that, but also telling people to go through their language in government agencies and remove references to some of these things. And there are pages that are now down from NOAA and other agencies where they do this research. I went to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Sciences homepage.
Okay.
And I read, and here's what it says there. Research indicates that the concentration of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, has seen unprecedented increase primarily due to the combustion of fossil fuels and urbanization of natural areas. Adding more heat-trapping gases to the atmosphere is causing global temperatures to increase, causing changes to the Earth's climatic system, resulting in more variable and extreme weather conditions.
Yeah.
That's on your website.
Yeah, that was done by a UNH study.
Right.
I don't agree with it, but yeah.
But you haven't taken it off your website. We're taking this off.
I'm sorry, because I disagree with it, it shouldn't be on the government website?
Well, because somebody disagrees, but it's
because
now.
Because somebody disagrees, we're not going to put it, like, come on.
But you see what's happening at NOAA and these other places where this research is being done. So again, you're having your conversation with the president. What should the federal government be doing and saying about climate change?
So just generally speaking, the climate is changing. It is not the end of the world. It is not the catastrophe that folks have made it out to be. Look, I spent my career doing this. This is what I did. I was the environmental engineer. I went to MIT. Believe me, let's take a step back. If in 1986, when Al Gore went to the floor of the U.S. Senate and said, based on information in the early 2000s, half of Florida will be underwater. That guy said that. And we spent billions of dollars based on that nonsense. Do you know how much the coastline of Florida has changed? Virtually very little.
It has changed. There is sea level rise. There's sunny day flooding.
How much is sea level rise? You want to argue? Let's argue it.
Well,
how much is sea level rise?
Not feet. Half the state isn't under.
2.5 millimeters per year.
Oh, okay.
So, but my point is this, when you have officials arguing that we should spend billions of dollars when we haven't lost any coastline over 40 years, Al Gore told us that population increases were going to make the earth barren by 2010.
And it's
not true.
And if you have a home on the coastlines, or if you have a home where the wildfires are, and you try to buy homeowners insurance now, or flood insurance, you can barely afford it.
Only in California.
No.
Yes.
In a lot of seaside communities, absolutely.
I have a coastline. Everyone in the houses in New Hampshire have insurance.
Maybe you're not in the bullseye, but go to Florida where the
you think
homeowners
that-
prices have gone up. I
think the coastline is eroding in Florida faster than New Hampshire?
I'm-
I could go through global planetary science with you, but it goes up and down at the same level.
Actuaries at insurance companies have calculated the risk, and they are charging you for it. They're not. Maybe they're price gouging.
Would
then
you
have
agree
another-
with me that the message driven by an extreme left on climate change in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, a lot of it has not come to fruition?
I would. Well, you have to tell me what message you're talking about.
The message that Al Gore said when half of Florida
But I
was
will
going to
tell
be
you that a
underwater.
lot of the message has happened. That climate, that extreme weather has increased.
Sure.
Droughts and wildfires and heat have hit new records. Extinctions are taking place in record numbers in some places. Our ice loss is dramatic. So
Well, I would argue the extreme weather piece.
you would argue the extreme weather piece?
Florida had less hurricanes in the last 10 years than the previous 50.
What are the price tags on the extreme weather we've had? Whether the weather going through Tennessee and North Carolina, or the weather or the wildfires that have hit California.
You want to argue price tag versus climate change?
What I'm saying, there's now attributional science too that connects these things, right? You can't say
And the
this
trillions
storm
of
was
dollars
caused-
that this planet has spent on it, I would argue has made things better, but not so marginally better at the cost of all the other programs and important things we should have been funding and prioritizing.
I'm
not
We
into-
don't
guys,
need to
I'm-
get into an argument about how serious it is. The question really is should the
But it's the
research-
fear-mongering.
should the re- and the fear-mongering is wrong. And the left has driven some of that. And the environmental movement, many of them say that we need to reframe this in a different way. Fair enough. What I'm asking about is where do we go now? Because this administration seems to be saying, well, has said, the president has said it's a hoax. This is a drill baby drill administration. Is that the right way
No,
to go?
climate change isn't a hoax, but we don't need to be spent. The Green New Deal is a disaster. It is a $10 trillion disaster.
Depends what is the Green New Deal? I don't even know what that
It's
really means.
funding places like Cylinder that go bankrupt within a couple years. The giant solar project in Arizona that was funded 10 years ago that has now been completely shut down because the economics don't work. In New Hampshire, we designed. I love the idea of offshore wind. I went gangbusters on designing and planning for offshore wind, which I think would be great. Guess what? The cost doesn't make any sense. So therefore, we're not going to do it because it raises energy prices. Why? This stuff, the majority of Green New Deal and climate change type initiatives, you see it on your energy bill. Who gets hurt by an energy bill? Most of us can pay our energy bill. But an elderly couple on a fixed income can't. And when their energy bill goes from $120 to $170, it becomes almost unpayable. Why is it that when I bring hydropower down from Canada, if the hydro plants are too big, it's not considered renewable and they don't get renewable energy credits? Does that make sense to anybody? So don't tell me they're not gaming this system with massively high prices. I was an environmental consultant. Do you know how much money environmental consultants make extending this stuff out, doing these EIS studies, doing these extended studies? It's not I'm not going to call it a scam, but it's insanely expensive, and the government doesn't pay. You do. Your grandparents do. Folks on low-income families do. They have to pay it on their energy bill. You always have to say, we're going to address climate change, but let's do it through the lens of the ratepayer, those that have to pay that bill. So that's it. You have to understand this give and take on all this, and the cost is a very serious issue when you have a country that is $36 trillion in debt.
Okay, so I want to go on to other things, but I just want to say this before we move on. Yes, the cost is an issue, and yes, the country is in debt. But let's think about how much money, taxpayer money, over the years has gone to fossil fuel companies to let them drill and to support their businesses and to depreciate the amount of money that they put in.
Who are the biggest renewable energy companies in the country?
So when you talk about government money being wasted and government money going in, and let's say something else, if we're going to transition to another energy infrastructure, it's going to take massive amounts of time, money, investment, innovation. That's happening, and it's very exciting. Some of it's owned by China right now because the Chinese government is investing like crazy in solar panels, battery technologies, and all the
coal plants.
So, yes, coal plants.
50 coal plants a year.
Okay, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the future and how competitive America is going to be.
Do you think China cares about the environmental future of this planet? At
Yes,
putting up 50 coal plants a year?
Okay, so
I mean,
like I said,
seriously,
we could, and we should do this again.
Yeah.
Just talk about this, but I want to go to something else, which is Congress and the Republican Party. Okay, in the world of checks and balances, what role should Congress have, in your view?
Oh, a huge role, right? Our three. So let me tell you.
And then I want to say we'll come.
So the
to
role
questions.
of Congress, the presidency, and the judicial branch are really key to my optimism. A former president said this to me once, and he was spot on, because I had the same thing. I said, what are we going to do? You know, leaders and, you know, we're the next president, it's all about money and gerrymandering and all this stuff. He said, Gov, chill out, chill out. He was chewing on a dry cigar. He said, chill out, chill out. He said, assholes come and go, but America's institutions are strong. And he's right.
You talking about anybody in particular here?
Yeah, I am. He had a thick Texas accent. And he said, look, remember, this is the only country in the free world where our parliament, our Congress, if you will, is elected completely separate from the executive. Remember, in most countries, parliament picks the prime minister. We don't. We keep our president completely separate from the legislative branch. And we're one of the only places that does that for the purpose of checks and balances. We keep our judicial completely separate. Do folks get nominated or not nominated based on politics? Of course, that happens all the time on both sides, and that's why the pendulum goes back and forth. But the fact that we have that checks and balances and that virtually no other country has, don't forget, the institutions are strong. We went through I'm going to go way back. You got to bear with me. We went through a civil war, tore this country apart. But Congress, the presidency, the judicial branch, federalism, where the states really have the ultimate say in what happens, that stood strong. We went through World War I, World War II. We went through the civil rights movement, where we saw America's greatest leaders, greatest voices, literally assassinated in front of our eyes. Think about that. JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King Jr. Literally assassinated. People said the American experiment is over, and we had a right to panic. We stood strong, and we came back from it. We went through 9/11. We went through a pandemic. The institutions fundamentally are there and sound. Now, I would argue that we have other things that are infecting those institutions, like I think we need campaign finance reform. I think we need term limits. I think we shouldn't probably vote for anybody who doesn't agree with those two things at least. I think gerrymandering that's a really hard one to put back in the bottle, but that's one of the fundamental problems we have within Congress. But at its core, sometimes Democrats run Congress, sometimes Republicans. Sometimes Democrats run Senate, sometimes Republicans. It's a really good thing, guys. It means at the end of the day, we swing back and forth. You have to earn it, and to get something done, you're going to have to ultimately cross the aisle. I think we've lost a little bit of that over the last 10 years, but believe me, our institutions here are very sound, they're very strong, and they will carry the day, ultimately. We're going to go through some pains, like we're going through now. I mean, paying off $36 trillion in debt is going to be really hard. There's no easy way to do it, but you cannot ignore it. These buffoons have ignored it, and you should all be really angry at that. You shouldn't be angry. You want to dislike Trump, I don't care. You want to dislike Elon, I don't care. I'm not apologizing for them. They're kind of interesting, odd people, frankly. But the one thing, we were talking about this earlier. If Barack Obama was doing what Trump was doing, and let's say he brought in George Soros, not Elon Musk, as a Republican, I'd be like, oh my God, what is he doing? I'm trying my best to say, and this is the fundamental problem.
So why, as a Republican, aren't you saying, oh my God, what is he doing with Elon Musk?
Right. So what I'm trying to, because I wouldn't be right in saying, I'm trying to take the personality out of it. I'm trying to look at what is the purpose of what they're doing. They're not doing it because they don't like Democrats or something. I think Democrats should say, well, we got to cut something. Oh, they put out they put out that tweet where Obama had a great speech in the beginning of his first term where he said, we're going to get rid of departments. We're going to be efficient. We're going to finally get this thing under control because our finances are really out of control.
Bill Clinton in an inaugural address said the era of big government is over.
That's right. So they all talked a good game. They all had the right idea. These were smart people, but they didn't have the Congress and the right pieces in place to actually fulfill on it. People are getting upset, but guys, someone's got to pay. This is all about just dollars and cents. Don't get emotional. It's hard not to, because we all take it personal in some ways. There'll be massive programs in my own state of New Hampshire. There'll be a lot of layoffs potentially in New Hampshire. But at the end of the day, if we don't get our finances under control, believe me, this experiment that's how the experiment ends. Not because of Congress and the presidency, because we ignore the cost of all this. And eventually, we can't. How much do we pay in interest this year?
Oh, gosh, I'm $36 trillion?
No, in interest. So
well, you're paying on the debt.
So our budget right now is about $6.5 trillion.
Yeah.
$1 trillion of that is just interest. In 7 or 8 years, that goes to $1.8 trillion. 1.8 trillion is interest. It's for nothing.
Can
you imagine what we could fund with Medicare and Medicaid and all these other programs if we had just been smarter with our dollars 20 years ago? That's fundamentally what these guys are doing. They're saying we got to get our fiscal house in order today, or in just a few years. It's not 20 years, it's more like 8 years. What happens? Social Security goes bankrupt. Medicare at the same time goes bankrupt. The interest rate goes to 1.8 trillion. Our spending is still rising year over year. So 36 trillion in total debt goes to 42 trillion in total debt. This is a massive car crash of finances. They're trying to get some control over. They're trying to do it hard and fast. And they're trying to say, Congress, you better get your act together. We're going to give you the ideas and we hope you act on it. I know it's not pleasant, but I'm sorry. And by the way, why doesn't this happen in the States? I go back to it. We all have to live by balanced budgets.
I want to ask another question.
It's very important.
I want to ask another question of the audience. Of the students in the room, how many of you think you may not have Social Security, or that may not be around when you retire?
That sucks. That sucks. That's awful. You should have Social Security when you retire. And if
which means there have to be very hard decisions. But I'm going to come back to it because one of them was made by your dad and the president at the time who said, ooh, you know, I said we weren't going to raise taxes, and we needed to. So there's going to be some surprises here. We're running down on time. I want to get to some audience questions, but I do want to ask you about the Republican Party and the changes in the Republican Party and where it stands. I mean, we've seen this administration has turned Republican orthodoxy on its head, right?
Traditional, yeah.
Traditional,
and I'm a classic Reagan Republican, so I get frustrated with that.
Trade, tariffs. Reagan talked about, immigration in glowing terms in his farewell speech. Ethan Lynn, where's Ethan? Is Ethan in the room? Ethan's here. We talked to Ethan earlier. Ethan is a political science major. He also happens to be the vice president of student government here. And he had an observation about people changing their policies, their positions, apparently. Let's roll that video.
How they juggle changing their positions so quickly. With USAID, we saw a lot of Republicans, especially in the Senate, that had just last year been tweeting about how important the program was, and how this year it's apparently fraudulent and full of scams, and it's disrupting the American taxpayer dollar.
Yeah.
So whether it's USAID or anything else, what about what it means to be a Republican?
So, well, that's two separate questions. Well, to deal with the USAID thing, I think a lot of folks in Congress had no idea what USAID really did. They saw a couple of the key programs that are very beneficial, that are great, that'll likely stay under the Department of State, and they're tweeting about how wonderful it is. They're opening their eyes to all the programs that are in there that they didn't realize were in there. I mean, there's so much spending in there that if we went through the list, you'd be like, okay, I don't think we need to do that, and that. There's a lot of things we do internationally on health. Right? I think a lot of that will come back into play, and there's a big push. They put the Ebola money back in. They put the AIDS money back into Africa and things like that. The Get Out the Vote, $26 million in Somalia, probably not, we can fund that, but maybe not the highest and best use for that $26 million, and I think a lot of the folks are going, okay, wait a minute. We didn't realize all this other stuff was in there because it was a quasi-government agency that didn't have to report up every line item. So I wouldn't call that a changing of position. I think they're becoming aware, hey, wait a minute, there's some things here that probably have to be reorganized and realigned. And so the question, though, on the Republican Party and changing positions, let's understand, Donald Trump is a lifelong Democrat. He was, right? Until he was a Republican, he was a lifelong Democrat.
Once upon a time, a pro-choice.
Right? He was a pro-choice. I'm a pro-choice Republican. He was a pro-choice Democrat. Now he's a pro-life Republican. So go figure. So I'm never going to try to explain why people change their positions and whatnot. I'm a big believer you got to be true to your values. I don't mind if people change a position. Just explain it, right? I've changed my position on various things, nothing too major. Maybe I wanted this, and then I kind of cut back, or I had an idea about something, and I realized, you know what, it's going to really affect these local communities in a negative way that I didn't see, so I'll pull back. And it's not so much changing a position, but saying, okay, maybe we just have to be more measured about how we go about it, and maybe more strategic. I'm not going to justify Congress. I can justify, you want to talk changing positions? How about a Democrat Party that just in 2009, where Hillary Clinton stood up, and rightly so said, if you're illegal and you commit a crime, you are out of this country. And then never would have said defund the police, never would have said some of these extreme things. And all of a sudden, 15 years later, they're talking about defunding the police, open borders, everyone gets to stay. So both parties, don't say the Republicans are somehow guilty of changing positions when the Democrats, I would argue this. Someone came to me in the media and said, Governor, why do you think the country's gotten more conservative to let Trump win? Guys, the country is not more conservative. The country is right where it's always been. Trump won the race, to be sure, handily, but it was really more of a loss by the Democrats, right? There are Democrats, there are working class Americans that were lifelong Democrats that said, we are done with this party. We're done being told you're for us and you're not doing anything. I knew Trump was going to win 6 months ago. And it wasn't because I just hoped it or whatever. It's because I saw two key numbers that no one wanted to talk about. He was definitely going to get more African-American voters and more Latino voters than any Republican in history.
Doubled his African-American vote, and Latino voters 47%, highest.
Game over. Right there was over. I mean, because if you do that and you translate to what happens in places like Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, you saw where all the swing states were going to go. The mainstream media didn't want to look at that, and I kept saying, guys, don't look at a national poll number. That doesn't mean anything. Look at the subtext here. And the subtext of a conversation is working class Americans said to the Democrat Party, we're not more conservative, we're still the same families, hardworking Americans we always are, but you've left us. So I would very strongly argue, and I think the proof is this election, the Democrat Party changed their priorities, philosophy, and far more than the Republicans have. Trump is Trump, I get it. But in terms of a party kind of, and where are they now? I mean, guys, the Democrat Party, it'll fix itself. It'll figure out who their leader is, what their priorities are. They're not getting there very quickly, I'll tell you that. Why are Trump's numbers going up? Why are Trump's numbers going up? Because Americans say, look, we might not like the guy, we might not like his style, his approach, and how he talks, but God damn it, somebody in Washington is finally doing something.
Just one correction. I guess it's a correction. 538 shows his numbers fairly stable at about 49% approval. The number that's gone up is the disapproval number in their, aggregate polling, up about 3-4 points over 3 weeks.
I'm reporting what CNN said, which was that he had the highest net positive approval. This was maybe 10 days ago, so maybe it's changed since then. But I'm just telling you, his numbers are strong.
I'm not trying to pick up, pick nits here, because the numbers are very stable, and he is.
Put it this way:
for now,
if 6 months ago you saw what Trump was going to do in his first month, would you believe he had such strong approval? No, you'd be like, oh my God, the whole world's going to go against him.
It's interesting, though. The Wall Street Journal just went out.
There
was an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal, and they went and they talked to some swing voters, and some are very much still with Trump. There were a couple people that they found, and they quoted from Nebraska and elsewhere, said, if I'd have known he was going to do this, I would have voted for Harris. So I think this is worth watching over the next 1, 3, 6 months, because it could be a dynamic situation. I want to go to audience questions now. We've got some that came in. If you've got one that you'd like to do, raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you while we're doing that. Let me start with one. I actually have a question from our president, President Granberg, GW president, who couldn't be here. Oh. She said, you have universities that have been in the spot like during the debates over higher education. As a governor, what are the greatest benefits to having strong research universities in your state?
Well, whether it's in my state or in Boston or in California.
Well, in your state. She's asking you as a governor of a state.
Well, theoretically, a lot of the research that comes out of universities, there are other businesses that will tie in. So we did a lot of research on bioregenerative medicine, right? Growing hearts and lungs from your own DNA so you didn't have to be on a wait list. Manchester, New Hampshire is the heart of that in America right now. And we literally we're building a new factory. A private industry is building a factory to literally grow hearts, lungs, and all these amazing things. It's so cool. That comes out of being near the research and being the R&D and all that sort of thing.
And so that comes from research money that comes from where?
Well, from the federal government, from private sector. Yeah, sure.
So maybe if you were talking to Trump, might you talk about that too?
No, the NIH stuff?
Yeah.
So Trump doesn't say, this is where I think Trump has really missed the mark. He didn't message this right. I'm going to take a half a step back. When we sign a contract with somebody to do a federal contract, the contract says you can take 8 to 12% for overhead and profit. It's a limit, right, to make sure no contractor in America can bilk the system, or theoretically it's supposed to limit bilking the system. The NIH grants, for every $1 million that goes in, on average, only $500,000 gets put to the R&D. The other $500,000 goes to overhead and salaries. So what they've said is, hey, you can have the NIH grants, but only 15%, like other government contracts, should go to overhead and salaries. Shouldn't $850,000 go to the R&D? That's what it should be. It's not designed to keep your staff employed. It's designed to go into the research and development for new medicine and technology and all the
You
good
do have
stuff.
to keep the lights on. You do have to buy the microscopes.
And
telescopes.
15%
You
is
have-
enough.
Says who?
It says that all the other contractors with the federal government that take the same amount.
but-
Why should universities get 50% when Deloitte with a government contract gets 9%?
Because, well, a university Deloitte doesn't run laboratories.
They have employees and lights they have to keep on.
But they don't. But do they have laboratories to the extent that the research that's being done at
The money,
universities?
the 850,000 goes to the laboratories. It doesn't. It can't go to salaries. It goes to the research. It doesn't go to the salaries. I mean, some of it does. 15% does. It's still actually more generous than the average government contract. So all the NIH change is saying is you need to put money to the research, not to your staff.
If the move to 15% turned off the lights, made this research not possible, is that the outcome that we should want because we're a fiscal hawk?
If the move to 15% has that result, and we'll see if it does, then Congress can come back and revisit the rules. But the NIH has just thrown out all the other federal government rules and said, we're going to play by our own rules, and universities can spend as much as they want on staff. You can't. Why? And then should we let everybody spend 50% on overhead? Why are universities treated differently? I think that's all they're saying. Everyone has to play by the same rules. You want to change rules, go to Congress and change rules. I got no problem with that. Make it 20, make it 30%, if that's what it takes. But there's a process to do that, not arbitrarily.
Well, but arbitrarily, this decision came down arbitrarily. Perhaps it would have been better if they...
It's not arbitrary because they're saying everyone plays by the same rules. That's not arbitrary.
It's arbitrary to go from whatever it was, and some of these indirects are negotiated at different levels, to go one day after things have been signed from whatever it was down to 15%. That's actually stopped some of this research.
But that's not arbitrary. They're saying 15% is what is defined in the rules. We're just saying you now have to play by the same rules as everybody else. That's not arbitrary.
It's also after funding grants have been approved, so it's
I'm a big
breaking
believer
a contract.
that, yeah, I agree with that. I think if funding grants have been approved, they have to go forward and they should change it for new stuff going forward. I have no problem. But understand, the goal is to put the money in the research, not in the staff. And why would anyone complain with that? University might not like it because they can't hire more staff, but let's put it in the research. That's actually going to make this country better and heal people.
But they would argue, and we could invite people up here to do this, but is that staff is necessary to support the research. It's not,
let's remember, the universities are using students for half of their staff, right? Are they paying these students giant salaries that the Deloittes of the world have to pay? I would argue universities have cheaper staff than everybody else.
Everybody in the room would agree with that.
I mean, really, play by the same rules as everybody else. Maybe they should pay all their students as much as they pay the experts at a government contractor.
Oh, that'll help keep tuition down. Okay.
Don't get started with that. Universities have abused you guys in terms of tuition over the past 25 years. Why has university tuition gone up at 3 times the rate of inflation since 2000? Why? No one's ever asked that question and got a straight answer. I know exactly why it is. Government took over the loan process. Everyone was able to get a loan. So there was no incentive for universities to keep their numbers down because everyone was going to get money. And so it kept building and building and building. Who gets screwed? You. You guys did. I mean, why? Why does this university go up 3 times the inflation rate of any other business in America? Explain that.
Again,
ask your president.
Separate.
I mean, I'm a dad. Look, I'm a dad with kids ready to go to college. I'm pretty pissed about it.
I've paid it. I've done it.
It stinks.
It does stink, but
Why
it's also
are you guys mad at that?
But can I tell you what people pay actually doesn't cover the cost of what the education and the institution costs to run.
And I would argue you have to restructure a lot of your. I mean, I don't know about GW. I don't want to, but I'm telling you, at UNH, we said we're going to cut out the fat. We're going to try to restructure our university staff contracts and that sort of thing, and make sure that we're getting what we pay for. And if we have to. Look, if we have to cut a couple basket weaving classes, we're going to do it. We're going to focus on.
Come on now, come on.
Well, I don't think there's basket weavers in here. Maybe there are. God bless it. But we're going to align I made sure that we aligned our degrees with the workforce need, as opposed to just what the university wanted to do to make the whole process more efficient. And that way, while my 8 years as governor, UNH, frozen tuition for 8 years. Frozen tuition.
For in-state or for everybody?
For everybody. I don't know if you guys could say the same thing. It's really hard. I had to make some real tough decisions. But at the end of the day, you guys and your families have to pay. You're going to... $278.12. You know what $278.12 was? It was what my wife and I had to pay every single month till I was about 42. And she went to Harvard, I went to MIT, and man, we got off lucky compared to you guys. I mean, you guys are going to be paying these student loans forever, forever. And it's wrong. It's really wrong. And when they say they're going to get rid of your student loan, right? Guys, that just makes the cost of the universities go higher. There's no incentive for universities to drop the amount if they think the federal government's just going to pay your loans off.
I think you should
So
come
it's
here and
crazy.
teach a business course.
I think it's nuts. And my biggest, I don't mean to keep interrupting, my biggest argument is this. You guys should be mad. I don't know why you're not mad at that. I'm mad as a parent. Your parents should be mad. You should demand and ask these questions. And I don't mean to throw GW under the bus. What did we see? NYU? I was just in New York last weekend, touring NYU with my daughter. NYU is well over $100,000 a year. Okay, it was $22,000 a year 20 years ago. It's gone up 4 times. But according to inflation, it should have only gone up about, to about $45,000, $50,000.
But that's the problem. Inflation
it's
does
so
not,
much overinflation.
Inflation does not measure the cost of running an institution like this. That's the problem. Same thing with healthcare.
But why should this institution be different than a Dairy Queen or a business? Every
because
business
we're
has
not
to
doing what Dairy Queen does, which is to make ice cream. I mean,
But they have costs like you do.
No, they don't. Okay, let's
But they do.
let's go to other questions on the
But
floor.
that's my point. They
because-
do. It's
all right, do we have a mic someplace? All right, Sarah, who we got? Stand up, please, and introduce yourself. And we're running a little over. It's an amazing conference.
I'll stay as long as you want. I'm having a good time.
We won't do that to the people in the audience. Let's go. Is 10 minutes okay, everybody? Another 10 minutes?
Whatever you want.
All right. Go ahead.
Hello, Governor. I'm from your state, and I'm from Sunapee, and I'm curious as to know, you disagree a lot about government funding for certain local projects. So to what extent should state government or federal government pay into local communities to stimulate economic growth? Just for example, in my community in Sunapee, we have a boat ramp that has been broken for years and years and years. Our select board has failed to fix it. Linda Tanner in Concord, and your budget has failed to fix it. The state government has failed to fix it. To what extent does the buck stop and we stop the bleeding and stop the hurt in our local?
It's so funny. I literally know the boat ramp you're talking about. So I will disagree with you on one thing. We put all the money in to fix it. The locals couldn't decide how to do it. Some locals wanted a boat ramp here. Some wanted to rebuild the one here. Some didn't want this one because of the smelt issue. They thought that disturbing this boat ramp would affect the smelt, so the environmentalists got involved. The funding was all there. In fact, we did a grant program. I'm going to make up a number here. I want to say about 52 of our 220 cities and towns, about 52 cities and towns took advantage of a local grant program to rebuild their boat ramps. To be honest, Sunapee just couldn't get their act together. And I'm not blaming them, but there's a local battle issue going on there. A lot of folks didn't want that boat ramp because they didn't want tourists from the outside coming in. Because if you rebuild it, the public has to have access to it. A lot of people on the lake, the rich guys on the lake, it's a lot of rich people on Sunapee, by the way, rich guys on the lake didn't want to have public access. So I'm all for giving the grants, and we do that all the time, but the locals have to figure out how to do it. And in that example, and there were others, I'm not just throwing Sunapee under the bus. I think it's funny that you come from Sunapee, because it's a great town, but they couldn't ever quite figure it out. I did a program where we invested in theaters, right, local theaters. We rebuilt all the local theaters during COVID, because we were basically open during COVID where everyone else shut down. We had good guidelines and rules, and we invested our dollars back into business and back into cities and towns. So I think it's a hugely important effort. That's kind of the key, my key argument to what's happening in Washington now. Federalism, guys. Washington is not in charge of the government. The states are. 50 states are. And they should have the final say. So if the government wants to give grants and opportunity, great. Give it to California and let California do with it what they want on environmental, infrastructure, education, whatever. Give it to New Hampshire. It wasn't designed to be everybody is the same. Remember, this isn't a democracy. It's a republic, right? Democracy is the act of voting, but we live in a republic where the states and locals should have more control. The control should decrease as you go higher up the ladder, not increase. That's why New Hampshire is successful. I had Republicans try to pass a bill especially after COVID, that said, if a local school boards do X, Y, and Z, the state is now going to tell them they can't do that. And it was mostly tearing apart some of these more liberal local school boards. I said, guys, we're not doing that. Local control is paramount, because that's where parents get involved. As soon as the state takes over control of something and tells you that you're doing it wrong, that's where the system breaks down. The best thing you can do is let locals fail. And what I mean by that is this. It's like your kids. You learn by making mistakes, not by your parents quote unquote, fixing everything their way, right? That's how you become better. That's how you become stronger. That's how the checks and balances work. So sometimes if a local district did something, who would know better, who knows best for what's in that local school? The governor or the parents and teachers? They know, and they're the voters. So give them the control. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, but they'll figure it out. If something doesn't work, they'll change. And they can change much faster at a local level than at the state level. So I'm all for giving those grants, all for pushing the cash down and letting them have control. Some will do great, some won't. Now, of course, up here, you got to have certain rules and regulations at the state level. But New Hampshire is fundamentally different than all 50 states. Vermont's a little bit the same, a little bit, not much.
It's
A little different.
politically, it's very
Politically, it's very different. But it's okay to let locals make mistakes because that's where the empowerment is. And the key to all this is letting the individual have the control. Government's not here to solve your problems.
Government may not be here to solve it, but
But to create opportunity.
One of the interesting arguments around this, though, is that when you have local control like this, you can end up with very unequal outcomes.
That's okay.
Well, it may be okay unless you live in the state and you say, I'm a low-income person or I'm a this person, and over that,
And
town,
then you
they're
go to
doing
town
great,
meeting and you change the funding scheme. You go to town meeting and vote on your taxes. You go to town meeting and decide what the curriculum is in your school.
What you may be able to change or not change locally. I mean, it's a very interesting and philosophical conversation about what the community, what responsibility society has to address inequality. All right? I mean, states' rights, obviously, was the argument that propelled slavery for years, all right? Which was, that's what that was built around.
Well, slavery was around long before states' rights. States' rights kept it around longer.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's
what you're saying.
That's my point. And we now have a patchwork of access to reproductive care based on states' decisions. So you can end up with that creating very unequal outcomes.
But that's okay. Unequal is sometimes unequal is okay. This fundamental human rights and basic slavery and all this sort of thing, that's what, and government is here at its primary source for health and safety. Beyond that, you should question why government's involved. Or beyond that, you should question why bigger government's involved, and you should want it to be held at a local level.
Let me get back to another question, and we'll go on to the next one, one here and then back to the audience. So we got a very interesting one from Lyle Greenfield. Lyle Greenfield is an author, and he wrote a book called Uniting the States of America, a self-care plan for a wounded nation.
Okay.
And I know Lyle, and I told him we were talking. He said, I have some questions for the governor. I said, fire away. And he made reference to the last guest we had here, which was Governor Spencer Cox of Utah, who had the Disagree Better campaign. And Lyle asks, he said, Spencer Cox with his Disagree Better, Healthy Conflict for a Better Policy, wrote, there's an exhausted majority of Americans out there who are discouraged by the ugliness of our politics today. The divisiveness undermines our success as a nation, hurts our relationships with friends and family. We don't all have to agree on every issue, but we have to find a way to disagree better. And what Lyle asks is, Governor, since that initiative was put in place, and you're aware of it because you worked on it, have you seen any difference in the way your colleagues interact with each other or the elected Congress?
Well, I wouldn't say I've seen a difference since it was put in place per se, but I'll say all 50 governors, pretty much, Republican, we all get along. We're not like Congress where we're at. I call Kathy Hochul and ask her for ideas. I bump into any number of governors and say, J.B. Pritzker, J.B. and I disagree on everything, right? And we can be pretty tough. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But during COVID, J.B. and I were banging ideas back and forth. And he had some good ideas or whatever. Governors actually work together very, very well. We disagree better all the time. And the more local, I go back to what I started with, guys. I know you're probably tired of hearing me saying, but the more local you keep empowerment and the more local you keep the decisions, the better along everybody gets. Because I got to fight those issues with my neighbor. And I fight on the issue, not on the personality. The more you go national, it becomes personality driven. I don't like Trump, I don't like Elon, so therefore I don't like what they're doing. I don't like Barack, I don't like George Soros or whatever, so therefore I don't like what they're doing. That's the problem. You gotta have the courage and the empathy to take the personality out of the situation and say, at the core, what are we fundamentally getting at? I think Obama did some really good things. I think Biden was a super nice guy. I think Joe Biden was a very sweet guy. Horrible president, but a very sweet, sweet guy. So you gotta take but I worked very hard to separate that out. I think at a local level we do it. I think nationally, everyone wants to talk about national politics, but that's where there's no sense of accountability to that.
Let's go to another question on the floor. Sarah, I'll let you find somebody we didn't get to before.
Okay. Oh, one of the questions is, so you keep talking about how like separating the person and like what they believe. When you look back to January 6th and things and those type of things that people believe in, like even pro-choice or pro-life, how are you able to separate those actions from the actual person? Because I think about like people who, you know, are so gung-ho and like so supportive of January 6th. I like can't associate myself with them because they.
Yeah, that's okay.
But how you talk about like separating that? How do you separate that from the person?
Sure.
And
So-
before you answer that, Sarah, could I ask you for the next question? Let's tee up Ethan Fitzgerald's question that we've got on tape for the next one. Ethan's in the room too. Go
So
ahead.
really quick, so let's just use January 6th as an example. A terrible day. The president had a lot to do in citing that. It was awful. I'm not even thinking about the personalities involved. I just know that was wrong and bad and it was a mistake from its, for lack of a better term, policy, from the action, completely inappropriate. So on that one, again, I just focus, for myself, I focus on the issue. Now, maybe I'm a little different because I'm a governor. I have a responsibility to 220 cities and towns, all 1.4 million people, whether they voted for me or not. And one thing I try to do is say, look, I don't know your situation. I don't know your family's background. I don't know your business's problem. So that's why I keep going back to, I'm not here to solve your problems, but what I can do is create as many doors of opportunity as possible. And then live for your die. You do you. You find the door that best fits you and your need, and your family's need, and your kids' need. But when too often government says, I'm going to be one size fits all, and education's a great example, and you got to fit in this box. And for 98% of the kids, it's fine. But for 2% of the kids, it could be a disaster. So just let those families have a little flexibility. So I'm just using that as an example of always focusing on the issue and appreciating. I kind of do it in the opposite. I'm not trying to say I'm not going to consider your personality. I'm trying to say I know nothing about your story. And it could be tragic. It could have twists and turns. I don't know why you believe you. You know, sometimes when I get in an argument with some political argument and I'm not buying it, I'll just say, look, tell me more. I'm not there yet. Like, keep talking. Explain to me why you're there.
That was actually something.
And I'm not. So the more I know about your background, well, now I have an empathetic understanding of, okay, I see why this person's so passionate about X, Y, and Z. And I respect it. I might disagree with it in terms of policy and what we should do. But it's hard. If we all have that mentality, and by the way, I'm a very flawed human being, in case you can't tell. I'm sure you all believe that after this hour. But I'm not perfect, but I really try hard to enter these conversations with an empathetic ear. And if we all do that, I think generally the rising tide floats all boats, and we get to that better place of disagreeing better.
Let's take
It's
2
not
minutes
easy.
and one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. Do you have Ethan Fitzgerald is in the room, right? Ethan, where are you? There you are.
I need a
Debbie,
scotch.
let's take a listen.
I need a-
Listen, I welcome disagreement. I have disagreements with my friends all the time, whether it's just in personal interactions or whether it's policy. I think disagreement is natural. It's a part of life. And I think how you respond to it is important. I always try to listen and see the core issue where they're coming at something. Because normally when you bring in names, like whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, when you stick to those names and those bigger, ideas, then it's kind of hard to actually have a conversation. But if you're like, okay, let's actually have a conversation about what's going wrong in the economy right now, when you focus on those, then I've seen, at least in my conversations, that you can make progress.
That's it. He's got it. The only problem with Ethan is he's a political science degree.
He's also president
No,
of
I'm
the
just
Student
kidding.
Government
Totally kidding.
Association,
Yeah.
so he's got, watch this space, right? Leave us with a roadmap.
Okay.
Leave us with your sense of how we navigate what is an incredibly difficult time.
So I'm going to leave you, I'm going to change that a little. I'm going to leave you, this is what I firmly believe. How many political science degrees, right? Or how many want to go into public service? That's awesome. So here's the roadmap for you. And I could talk globally, but I want to talk a little more specifically. So the best public servants are those, don't go run for office right away, right? You got to have some real world experience. And I mean that very sincerely. I'm not saying work for a nonprofit, get a job somewhere, learn those soft skills of office. I mean, the soft skills of learning office politics, as insane as it can drive you, is really, really important for the bigger issues in terms of how to build teams, approach challenges, learn how to lose, right? Because you're going to lose a lot in public service. You're not going to get where you want. You're going to be a social worker that's fighting hard for this abused kid, and God damn it, that judge sent him back with the abusive dad, and it's going to drive you crazy. I've seen it so many times. It'll break your friggin' heart. It really will. But if you just give up at that point because you haven't built soft skills in life, or you haven't, It's really important to get a real job in some form. Don't just jump into politics. I think I do the political thing pretty well because I was an engineer. I was an environmental engineer, and then I bought and ran a business, and I had 800 employees. My job was to make sure that every one of my employees could bring home a paycheck. I ran a ski resort for a while. And let me tell you, when God doesn't give you snow and you have 800 employees depending on that paycheck, but no one came to ski.
Back to climate change again.
You're screwed. No. 150 inches on.
Just saying.
150 inches of snow on top of Waterville Valley this year, so don't give me that. But
that's this year.
You learn that those type of struggles are really important to be the best you can be when it comes to public service. And public service, it's wonderful, but it's not a career. It is service, right? I've seen a lot of folks in public service burn out too hard, too fast. I did it a little bit to my family. It's brutal on family, especially if you're in an elected office. It's noble. You should all do it. It's wonderful. But there's a path and a strategy there to be long-term successful. If you do that, a couple things happen. I think the most polarizing individuals sometimes just jump into politics without really understanding what it's all about or what the bigger picture is. So that's the best roadmap I want to leave people with in terms of getting along, disagreeing better, all those issues. It's about making sure your personal path is the path that you want, and you're setting yourself for that long-term success. And if we all do that, again, I just believe collectively we can get there. And it doesn't mean you're going to agree. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything other than have a strong cynicism of government. I'm from the government, and I'm saying you should not buy what we are shoveling. And I really mean that sincerely. And that's a great check.
You also believe that you can go into government and do good things.
And that's why democracy isn't eroding. Guys, democracy is so freaking strong because you have the final say. Ultimately, it's the voters that have the final say every single time. You might not get what you want. The other side might win. But the voters have the final say every single time. And that institution in itself is while it might be as polarizing as it's ever been before, it's actually as strong as it's ever been because the number of people that vote keep going up. We didn't get to talk about participate in primaries, right? The more people that participate in primaries, the less extremists you'll have. But the more you get out and vote, the more you participate, just because you don't win or whatever it is, don't get discouraged. Set yourself up for long-term success. But it's by building a lot of those soft skills to then incorporate into your community.
Is your definition of long-term success, you want to run for president?
No, because no, I did my 8 years, my 4 terms.
Are you done with politics?
Probably.
Might you run?
You know what I'm doing? I'm going to do the media thing. I'm aspiring to be Frank Sesno someday.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that.
But I'll probably do the media thing to scratch the political itch.
Yeah.
We'll see how long that lasts.
Okay.
But I don't feel the need that I have to be the guy in charge. You know, I'll be helpful. I worked with the Biden administration. I worked with the Trump administration. Why? Because it's in my state's interest to do so. And I called the balls and strikes like I saw them. Sometimes people agree. Sometimes it's okay.
So I want to thank you for your time. If you want to hang around for a bit, if you got a question, I'm sorry we couldn't come to more on the floor, but this has been really fascinating.
Fascinating is the right word.
Well, I think it's been interesting.
That's great.
And let me tell you what, it is hard to get a Republican to come and speak publicly.
I see why. No, I'm just kidding. I'm busting.
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you.
Don't be a dick. Thank you.
That's great.
That's great.
So if you want to hang around for a while. All right, so if you have a question and you want to come up and talk to the governor, he's here. If not, have a great evening.